The lights on the CNN stage burned hot as Kayleigh McEnany waited off camera, perfectly composed, holding her notes like a dagger in velvet. What she didn't know yet, but would soon discover, was that this interview was never meant to be fair. The producers had spent 2 weeks planning a strategic ambush, leaking internal memos between anchors and their team that read like political war plans. The goal was clear: destroy her credibility, paint her as a liar, corner her live. It was the kind of hit job that only a network as large and as deeply entrenched in political bias as CNN could execute. The night before, Kayleigh's team had received a call from CNN's lead producer, Laura McKinley, claiming the interview would be a neutral, objective policy discussion. But in a private Slack chat, Laura had typed, "We're going to make her lose it. She won't see it coming." The producers had prepared 6 gotcha segments, each loaded with edited clips, out-of-context quotes, and deliberately misleading headlines they were planning to flash on screen while she answered. What CNN didn't realize was that Kayleigh had seen this play before. She had lived it during her time as press secretary. But this was different. This was personal. The interview was to be broadcast live during CNN's primetime special, American Accountability. Kayleigh was told she'd have a full hour to discuss the Trump administration's record on free speech, press freedom, and government transparency. What she wasn't told: they had a surprise guest waiting in the wings, former FBI Director James Callahan, who had been publicly critical of Trump and had written an op-ed calling Kayleigh a dangerous revisionist in pearls. Behind closed doors, CNN's host, Mitchell Gaines, rehearsed the segment like a courtroom ambush, even practicing smirking condescension in front of a mirror while sipping his overpriced oat milk latte. Producers spent hours selecting B-roll footage to flash in the background during Kayleigh's responses. Clips of Trump at rallies, January 6th footage, even riots, all edited for emotional manipulation. Every image would be meant to make her look complicit, as if her words echoed in chaos. But Kayleigh wasn't walking into this unprepared. Back at her hotel room that morning, Kayleigh had received a an anonymous text from a blocked number read, "This isn't a normal interview. Watch your 6, they're bringing the heat." Attached was a PDF, screenshots of CNN's internal communication channels. Her eyes narrowed as she read each message. "Find the clip of her flubbing the 2020 numbers. See if we can catch her contradicting herself on COVID stats. Ask her something about race. Then cue the BLM footage behind her." It was all there. She sat down at her desk, surrounded by research binders, highlighters, and a lukewarm coffee, and began preparing a counterstrike if they wanted war. They'd get one back at CNN's Atlanta headquarters. The energy was electric. Staff ran through the halls shouting last-minute instructions. "Mic her up, recheck the overlays. Don't tell her about Callahan until segment 3. Kayleigh walked into the building with her signature calm, her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor like a metronome of defiance. The young production assistant who escorted her and tried to hide his nerves. "They're really going to try and corner you," he mumbled. Kayleigh just smiled. "Let them try." The green room was smaller than expected. On the wall hung a framed quote, "The press must hold power to account." Ironic. The same press that had spent 4 years calling her a liar, a propagandist, and a puppet was now sharpening its knives for another round. But Kayleigh didn't fear pressure. She thrived in it. She had walked through fire during her tenure, fending off loaded questions with precision that made even hardened journalists break. She sat still as a makeup artist dabbed powder on her cheeks. Across the hall, CNN host Mitchell Gaines adjusted his tie and reviewed his notes, chuckling to himself at the first question. "You say you believe in free speech, but weren't you the one defending lies every day?" The segment was rigged before it began. They had 3 goals. 1, make her defensive. 2, twist her words into an admission of guilt. And 3, paint her as a relic of Trump's chaotic legacy. CNN had run this tactic before with others, but this time they were cocky, too cocky. Because even with all their tech, their pre-cut reels, and their bias, they had overlooked one thing. Kayleigh wasn't just a spokesperson. She was a strategist with a memory like steel and a delivery sharper than most litigators. What they viewed as easy bait was a woman who had sparred with some of the most ruthless media operatives in modern history. Kayleigh requested a copy of the pre-interview outline just minutes before going live. IT was vague and generic. General questions on media, policy, and your current work. Not a single mention of the surprise guest. Not a single warning of the attack segments. IT confirmed everything. She leaned forward, looking into the mirror. "If they want a moment," she whispered to herself, "I'll give them one they'll never forget." In the control room, producers were practically giddy. "We'll run the clip of Trump telling reporters to shut up during her answer about press freedom," someone said. Another chimed in, "Don't forget to flash the COVID death counter. That always works." The director laughed. "Let's ruin her comeback tour before it even starts." Their mistake, underestimating how deeply Kayleigh understood optics, media manipulation, and live pressure politics. Right before she walked on stage, her assistant whispered in her ear, "They want you to break." She simply nodded. "Let's make them regret trying." The crowd clapped as the show began. Kayleigh stepped into the light, and Mitchell Gaines turned to her with his classic faux-friendly grin. "Well, look who we have here," he said. "The woman who defended Donald Trump for a living. Kayleigh, how does it feel to finally sit down in the lion's den? The crowd chuckled. The trap was set. But what CNN didn't know was that Kayleigh had a line-locked and loaded .1 sentence that would flip their narrative inside out. She had studied their tactics, reverse-engineered their lies, and found the weakest point in their armor. All she had to do now was wait. The CNN studio was chilled to 64 degrees, just cold enough to make a guest shiver under pressure. Kayleigh McEnany didn't flinch as the cameras went live. The studio darkened, save for the searing overhead lights illuminating the set. A quiet tension blanketed the room like fog. Everyone in the control booth knew what was coming. They were minutes away from executing the kind of premeditated media assassination that made headlines and secured viral clips. But this time, their target wasn't walking. In blind, Mitchell Gaines, CNN's primetime golden boy, leaned forward in his chair, radiating smugness masked as charm. "Welcome to American accountability, Kayleigh," he said with a smile too wide to be sincere. "Tonight, we're doing something a little different. We're not just talking about politics, we're talking about truth." The word truth lingered in the air like a bad aftertaste. Kayleigh gave a courteous nod, her posture impeccable, her eyes locked on Mitchell's with a kind of quiet warning. The trap had sprung, and she was already one step ahead. "Let's start with this," Mitchell said, gesturing toward the massive screen behind him. A video rolled without warning. Cut-up clips of Kayleigh during her time as press secretary. Alternative facts. The election wasn't over. The media is gaslighting America. All spliced together, out of context, made to sound chaotic. The crowd, hand-picked by CNN, laughed awkwardly, and Mitchell turned to her with theatrical concern. "Do you regret misleading the American people?" The bait was obvious, but Kayleigh didn't blink. "I regret that the American people had to get their information filtered through networks like yours," she replied calmly, "because you never told the whole story, only the parts that made you feel righteous." The room stiffened. Someone in the control booth muttered, "She's not taking it." Mitchell tried to recover, his brow furrowing slightly. "Kayleigh, we're just showing your own words." She smiled sweetly. "Then play the full clips. Or are your editors allergic to context?" He pivoted. "Let's talk about January 6th, he said sharply, cueing a sudden shift in lighting and tone. The screen cut to footage of the Capitol riot, overlaid with audio of Trump saying, "We love you. You stood at the White House podium," Mitchell began, "and told Americans that the president condemned the violence. But these images say otherwise." It was a trapdoor question, meant to corner her between loyalty and public outrage, but Kayleigh was ready. "I stood at that podium and read his exact statement. I urge everyone to remain peaceful, no violence. Respect law enforcement," she said, her voice steady. "You aired the Capitol footage but cut out that part of the transcript. That's not journalism, that's propaganda." The crowd murmured. Mitchell pressed harder. "But how do you explain the contradiction between what you said and what people saw?" She leaned in. "You mean the contradiction between what I said and what you chose to show?" Silence. The air tightened like a pulled string. Even the crew behind the camera froze for a beat. She had just flipped his question back at him, turning it from a defense into a charge. Mitchell pushed forward, a little rattled now. "Let's talk COVID," he said. The screen flashed a death toll. "During the pandemic, you defended policies that cost lives, mask resistance, reopening the country too early. Do you take responsibility for enabling that narrative?" The word enabling hung in the air like a blade. Kayleigh tilted her head slightly. "Do you take responsibility for censoring scientists who disagreed with lockdowns? For shaming working-class Americans who just wanted to keep their businesses open? For running death counters every day until Biden got elected and they disappeared?" Mitchell blinked, but said nothing. "You want to talk responsibility? Let's start with your own." The crowd went quiet. Even the pre-planted audience CNN had carefully selected wasn't clapping, and the control room, a tech assistant whispered, "She's controlling the narrative. He's losing grip." And then came segment 3, the surprise guest. "We have someone who'd like to join us," Mitchell said, turning with theatrical flair. Out walked former FBI Director James Callahan, who immediately took the offensive. "I've read your statements. You lied to protect a man who threatened democracy. That's not patriotism. That's complicity." A gasp rippled through the studio. Callahan was known for his long, academic lectures and establishment prestige. He'd been brought in to steamroll her with institutional weight. But Kayleigh wasn't moved. "Director Callahan," she said evenly, "you were the one who authorized surveillance on American citizens without proper warrants, weren't you?" He opened his mouth, but she continued. "You sat in front of Congress and said you didn't recall more times than anyone in modern history, and now you want to lecture me about truth?" Callahan's face tensed. Mitchell tried to interrupt. "Kayleigh," she cut him off with one raised hand. "CNN brought you in as a surprise attack. she said, looking directly into the camera. But surprises only work on people who don't do their homework. I read your op-eds, I read your memos, and I know exactly why you're here. It's not for truth, it's for theatrics. The audience exhaled, stunned. Callahan stammered, "This isn't about me." Kayleigh turned back to Mitchell. "You set this up as a public trial. You edited clips, omitted facts, and coordinated with a partisan critic to ambush me, and I'm still here, standing." Mitchell glanced toward the crew, signaling to wrap early. "Well, we'll have to leave it there for now," Kayleigh interrupted again. "Not yet." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with precision, and dropped the line she had crafted for this exact moment. A line designed to end the ambush in a single blow. "You wanted a viral moment, Mitchell. Here it is. The reason CNN fears people like me is because I speak without your permission." Boom! The studio exploded with energy. Half the crew stopped moving. Callahan looked as if he'd swallowed his tongue. Mitchell's rehearsed grin faded entirely, and the audience, hand-picked or not, broke into stunned applause. The sentence hit like a thunderclap, not just a clapback, but a dismantling of CNN's entire strategy. Twitter lit up within seconds. Kayleigh McEnany just dismantled CNN in real time. Did she just end this man's career? That sentence will be replayed for years. The ambush had failed. Worse, it had backfired, and Kayleigh wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The moment Kayleigh McEnany delivered her now iconic line, "You wanted a viral moment, Mitchell. Here it is. The reason CNN fears people like me is because I speak without your permission," was the precise second CNN lost control of their own live broadcast. For 3 full seconds, dead air followed. Mitchell Gaines, the once polished face of media precision, sat frozen like a man who had just been slapped with the truth in front of the nation. Former FBI Director James Callahan looked stunned, his mouth slightly open, the words stuck somewhere between pride and embarrassment. But it was the control room that felt it first. "Cut to commercial," someone screamed in the booth. "No, we're still live. There's no delay," a producer shouted back. Kayleigh knew what she'd done. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She stared straight into the camera and sat tall, letting her silence do what 100 facts couldn't: command the room. And in that silence, America was watching. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were being ripped from the live stream by viewers at home. The sentence was looped, subtitled, meme-ified, and dropped onto every corner of the internet. On Twitter, the hashtag "without your permission" trended globally within 11 minutes. Conservative influencers, even moderate liberals, began reposting the clip, stunned at the precision of Kayleigh's takedown. And while Twitter was catching fire, CNN's executive floor was melting down. In the 8th floor war room, Senior VP of Programming Angela Rollins was pacing so fast her smartwatch thought she was doing high-intensity cardio. "What the hell just happened? Where was the backup?" she barked into her headset. Her assistant mumbled, "The Callahan segment didn't land. She flipped it on us. It's everywhere already." Rollins slammed a palm on the conference table. "You were supposed to control the optics. You told me we'd have her cornered." Meanwhile, Kayleigh was walking out of the studio, serene as ever. As chaos erupted around her, a panicked intern rushed over. "Ms. McEnany, your clip is everywhere," he stammered. She took his phone. 1.3 million views, 0.3 different trending hashtags, hundreds of thousands of comments, most of them cheering her composure, her delivery, her refusal to be cornered. Fox News was already preparing a late-night special titled, Unedited, Kayleigh vs. CNN. Mitchell Gaines sat in the post-show green room staring at the floor, unable to process what had just happened. He had walked into the broadcast expecting to make headlines by exposing a propagandist. Instead, he had become the story, a failed interrogator with a shattered ego. His producer approached with a tablet showing the live online reactions. "This is really, really bad," she whispered. She flipped the narrative. Gaines shook his head. She didn't flip it. She owned it. On Capitol Hill, even politicians were reacting in real time. Senator Josh Hawley tweeted, "Kayleigh just bodied CNN on their own turf. Masterclass in staying composed under fire." Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard wrote, "I may not always agree with her, but that CNN interview was a disgrace. She handled it with more poise than I've ever seen live." Even some prominent journalists quietly admitted the ambush had gone too far. MSNBC's editorial director posted a now-deleted tweet. "Kayleigh McEnany was set up. Anyone watching could see it. CNN lost their credibility tonight." By midnight, the clip had over 32 million views on X, formerly Twitter, 18 million on Instagram, and a compilation on YouTube had already hit 6 million views in under 4 hours. Conservative creators rushed to publish reaction videos. TikTok creators were reenacting the moment with dramatic music and on-screen text. Even satire accounts like Babylon Bee jumped in. CNN ends all live interviews after Kayleigh McEnany incident. We'll stick to screaming in editorials instead. Back at CNN, the internal investigation had already begun. Emails were being pulled, Slack messages reviewed. The memo that described the interview plan as Operation Exposure, KM Edition, was suddenly being circulated to higher-ups. Legal teams were scrambling. Someone leaked the memo to Breitbart. An expose followed titled, "CNN's scripted war room against Kayleigh McEnany backfires on live live TV. Behind the scenes, staff morale at CNN plummeted. Producers were divided. Some defended the setup, saying Kayleigh had asked for it by agreeing to appear. Others were angry they'd been part of a dishonest segment. A junior writer named Hannah secretly emailed Kayleigh's team with an apology. Her message read, "I'm embarrassed to be part of this. They lied to everyone, including us. You didn't just hold your own. You buried them." By sunrise the next morning, Kayleigh's sentence had been reprinted on coffee mugs, t-shirts, and bumper stickers. Conservative PACs used it for fundraising.it was being quoted on AM radio and conservative podcasts. Glenn Beck called it the most elegant destruction of corporate media ever delivered. Tucker Carlson posted a clip of it with the caption, "This is how it's done." Meanwhile, CNN's PR team rushed to control the fallout. Mitchell Gaines was sent on a mini press tour to explain the interview, but every time he opened his mouth, he made it worse. When asked by NPR why he didn't challenge Kayleigh's misinformation, he fumbled, our intent was, we had our sources." That clip too went viral. He looked like a man unraveling at CNN's leadership, sensing disaster, drafted a public statement.it read, "Last night's interview was designed to promote transparency and public discourse. We regret if viewers felt the discussion became confrontational. But it was too late. The damage was done." Kayleigh had turned the most powerful liberal media machine in the world into a case study in media failure, and as she sat down with her team in a private suite overlooking the city, sipping tea calmly, her phone buzzed. A message from a former White House staffer. "You just did more for truth in 60 seconds than they've done in 60 years. She replied simply, "Truth doesn't need permission." And in the deepest corners of CNN's ivory tower, the one thing no one wanted to admit out loud echoed behind closed doors. Kayleigh McEnany had won. The morning after the viral CNN implosion, Kayleigh McEnany stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her downtown Atlanta hotel suite, phone in hand, already 37 missed calls deep. A soft golden sunrise painted the skyline, but her eyes were locked on something else. Numbers, overnight impressions, engagement spikes, national ratings data. Her CNN appearance, now dubbed The Sentence Heard, round the world, had just overtaken the viewership peak of the Democratic presidential debate re-air. From the year before, over 78 million impressions, a combined 46 million views across all major platforms. And that wasn't even counting TV syndication. CNN had handed her a loaded trap, and she disarmed it, flipped it, and handed it back wrapped in velvet. But Kayleigh wasn't done. If CNN thought they could slither back into narrative control, they didn't understand who they were dealing with. She didn't believe in playing defense. Not anymore. Within 12 hours of the interview, Kayleigh had been invited to appear on The Daily Wire, Fox News, Ben Shapiro, Dr. Phil, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and even a special segment of Piers Morgan Uncensored. She declined most of them, but not because she didn't want to speak. She wanted to speak once, with precision and on her terms. She chose Tucker Carlson unfiltered. The announcement alone made headlines. Kayleigh McEnany to break silence on CNN Firestorm. Live with Tucker tonight. CNN staffers watched in horror. Our teams scrambled to issue internal talking points in case staff were asked about the Kayleigh debacle. Executives called emergency meetings, trying to shape the narrative with the same tired language, disinformation, context, unexpected virality, and out-of-control social media echo chambers. But none of it mattered. The court of public opinion had already convened, and Kayleigh was the one sitting at the bench to be why the time she appeared on Tucker's show. The entire country was watching, dressed in a soft navy blazer. With calm poise and bulletproof confidence, she walked on set and shook Tucker's hand. He grinned. "You know, I've had some people torch networks before," he said on air, "but I've never seen anyone light the building on fire, walk out, and smile while it burned." Kayleigh responded with a half-smile. "They tried to control the narrative. I gave them a lesson in what happens when you come to a gunfight with an edited clip." The conversation moved like a political ballet. She revealed the leaked CNN memos her team had received. She exposed the producer's plan to bring in James Callahan as a surprise guest. She pointed out how the death toll counter vanished after Biden took office, a subtle but devastating blow that illustrated CNN's manipulative editorial strategy. The segment reached 10.2 million live viewers. The YouTube replay surpassed 12 million in the first day. Then, as the show wrapped up, Tucker leaned in. "Kayleigh," he said, "I don't mean to put you on the spot, but off camera we discussed something big." Kayleigh gave a knowing nod. Tucker turned to the camera. "For those watching, I want to be the first to share this. We are launching a new platform in 60 days, a hybrid network, TV, streaming, short form and long form, real news, unfiltered, and Kayleigh McEnany will be one of the founding partners." The screen flashed a logo, Sentinel. Beneath it, "Truth doesn't need permission." It was her line, her moment, her legacy. CNN couldn't believe it. They had tried to bury her, and in doing so, they'd resurrected a media empire in her name. That night, night, Twitter imploded. Elon Musk himself tweeted, "Kayleigh McEnany launching Sentinel? That's the move of a queen." Backstage, Kayleigh's team hugged. Her phone buzzed constantly. High-ranking senators, former presidents, ex-press secretaries, and donors wanted to be part of Sentinel. Investors began circling to be why the end of the week, Kayleigh had turned one moment into a movement. But behind the celebratory headlines, CNN continued to crumble internally. Morale hit rock bottom. Viewership dropped by 6% across prime time. A CNN whistleblower leaked an email from a senior producer to The Federalist. The subject line, "We handed her the sword." In the weeks that followed, Kayleigh went on a limited press run, not to capitalize, but to surgically clarify on Megyn Kelly. She revealed that 2 CNN staffers had contacted her with apologies. "They knew it was a hit job," she said, "but they didn't expect I'd have receipts." On Glenn Beck, she discussed the deeper issue, narrative monopoly. "For too long, they've tried to tell Americans what truth is, but truth doesn't need gatekeepers, IT needs light." Then the offers began. Book publishers, political action committees, even movie producers. One script from a major streaming platform carried a working title, The Permissionless Voice. But the one offer that stunned even her inner circle came via encrypted email from a DC law firm tied to a presidential exploratory committee. The subject line, "What would it take for you to run?" Kayleigh stared at the screen for a long minute. She hadn't expected this. Not yet. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from an unknown number. "You've changed the game, but they're scared. That means you're doing something right." There were no emojis, just a letter at the bottom. T. Whether it was Trump himself or someone close, she didn't care. What mattered now wasn't the validation at IT, was the mission. She had stepped into enemy territory, been surrounded by lies, and turned their spotlight into her own torch. The war for truth was just beginning, and Kayleigh McEnany was no longer playing defense. She was building an army in the glass towers of CNN's corporate headquarters. The atmosphere was no longer electric. It was acidic. Executive producers circled the drain of denial, biting their lips and scanning Twitter, YouTube, and internal Slack threads filled with mockery, memes, and panic. The phrase "truth doesn't need permission" had taken on a life of its own. Printed on t-shirts, used in Senate floor speeches, and spray-painted on brick walls near CNN's Manhattan bureau by grassroots conservatives. They knew the firestorm wouldn't fade unless they pushed back, and fast as began phase 2 of their war on Kayleigh McEnany. The retaliation campaign. If they couldn't out-debate her, they tried to delegitimize her. The first strike came in the form of a CNN exclusive investigation, aired on a Thursday night under a segment ominously titled, "Unmasked, the Distortion Engine Behind Kayleigh McEnany's Rise." Presented by senior correspondent Maya Ralston, the segment opened with somber music, black and white photos, and selectively edited clips of Kayleigh during tense White House briefings. But this time, the attack wasn't just rhetorical. They wanted blood. They accused her of weaponizing faith, pushing state propaganda, and being a face of polished deception. Their evidence included disgruntled ex-staffers, anonymous sources, and psychological analyses of her tone, posture, and smile. One so-called expert claimed, "McEnany's poise is actually a sign of dissociation common in sociopaths." The smear attempt was grotesque, but it was also a fatal miscalculation, because they underestimated how much dirt Kayleigh had on them. Within hours, her legal team issued a public cease and desist letter, not just to CNN, but to Maya Ralston personally. The letter included a 64-page legal brief that picked apart the segment line by line, citing timestamped lies, doctored footage comparisons, and internal communications from CNN whistleblowers who had come forward after the first ambush. One of those whistleblowers provided unedited footage showing Maya rehearsing her tone and gestures to appear more emotionally victimized, while describing Kayleigh's supposed emotional manipulation techniques. Kayleigh posted a video response on her social media pages, calmly sitting in a simple chair with a neutral background, her expression focused but resolute. She didn't scream. She didn't rant. She just said this: "When you can't defeat someone's argument, you attack their character." CNN has moved from fake news to failed character assassins. "I will not apologize for speaking clearly, calmly, and with conviction, and I won't be silenced. Not by anchors, not by former bureaucrats, and not by anyone who fears truth." Then she did something CNN hadn't expected. She released the footage. Not just one clip, but an entire archive she'd quietly been collecting for months. Private meetings, press briefings with off-record moments, email screenshots showing CNN hosts joking about how to bait conservatives, footage of on-set producers mocking Southerners, mocking Christians, mocking Trump voters, mocking veterans, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation between 2 CNN producers admitting they intentionally edit out facts to keep the story emotional. The video compilation was titled CNN Edited Reality, and within 48 hours, it had 97 million views. Suddenly, the tide turned from a media war into an existential credibility collapse for CNN. Sponsors pulled back. Ad agencies demanded optics reevaluation. 2 top producers resigned quietly. The network's legal team began negotiating negotiating settlements with whistleblowers to avoid more damaging leaks. But the worst blow came from inside the house. CNN's own former anchor, Chris Cuomo, publicly condemned the network in an unexpected tweet. "I don't always agree with Kayleigh McEnany, but this isn't journalism. This is vendetta TV. CNN owes viewers more than edited attacks." In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, CNN scheduled an editorial clarification to walk back their claims without apologizing. But Kayleigh wasn't done. That Sunday, she appeared at the Sentinel launch gala in Dallas, now a black tie event attended by over 1,200 guests, including media executives, senators, podcasters, investors, and former military leaders. The keynote speech, hers, she walked on stage as the crowd stood, a standing ovation before she spoke a word, and then, with her trademark calm fire, she delivered the knockout punch. "They tried to silence me with labels. Now they call me dangerous. But do you know what's truly dangerous? A network with global reach that calls itself journalism while pre-planning ambushes, distorting the past, and mocking the American people behind closed doors. That's not free press. That's political theater." Then she paused, let the silence breathe. "They picked a fight that I picked up the truth." The crowd erupted. Within 24 hours, 5 more CNN staffers contacted her legal team anonymously, submitting recordings, transcripts, and one particularly shocking revelation. A document that outlined watch lists CNN maintained for rising conservative voices. Kayleigh's name was circled twice. Now the story had become something far greater. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about the decay of media trust, the manipulation of emotion for ratings, and the slow death of free thought at the hands of corporate narrative machines. Politicians demanded investigations. The FCC quietly requested an internal report from CNN. Public trust in the network fell 12% in just a week. Kayleigh wasn't just surviving retaliation. She was dismantling the source of it, brick by brick, and as her final retaliation response video hit its 100 millionth view, she sat in her office at Sentinel, watching the countdown. Her assistant leaned in and whispered, "Do you think they'll try again?" Kayleigh smiled. "Not if they're smart." But then again, they never were. It began with a single sentence, but by now, it was a movement. "Truth doesn't need permission" wasn't just a phrase. It had become a rallying cry, a cultural defibrillator jolting millions out of media-induced apathy. Kayleigh McEnany, once branded by the establishment as nothing more than a polished mouthpiece, had rewritten the script, and no longer was she just a political commentator or a former press secretary. She was now the catalyst for a media revolution. As CNN scrambled in the weeks following its failed retaliation campaign, Kayleigh's empire was quietly solidifying. Sentinel, once a simple idea scrawled on a whiteboard, was now a fully funded media platform backed by over $100 million in private investments, 5 venture capital firms, and a growing army of digital creators who had grown sick of editorial shackles. With Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, and a rotating panel of independent voices on board, Sentinel wasn't just competing with legacy media, it was eating it alive. In just 30 days, Sentinel amassed over 12 million subscribers, with more daily active users than CNN Plus had ever achieved in its entire existence before it was shuttered. Their flagship show, Uncancelled, hosted by Kayleigh, quickly broke viewership records. Her first live monologue, The Truth Trap, How Media Manipulates You Without You Noticing, was watched live by over 9.4 million people, including U.S. senators, Pentagon analysts, and an unexpected audience, high school students. Teachers began using the monologue in class discussions about media bias and narrative framing. Debate coaches started referencing her CNN takedown as an example of rhetorical clarity under fire. At Liberty University, a journalism professor opened his lecture with the clip of Kayleigh saying, "They picked a fight that I picked up the truth." And in a high school in Iowa, a student delivered a speech titled, "Without Their Permission," quoting Kayleigh's viral sentence word for word to a standing ovation. Meanwhile, CNN's own staff saw a mass exodus. Behind closed doors, anchors who once whispered criticism about her were now shouting warnings about what she'd done to the entire industry. One producer confessed in a podcast, "She didn't just win, she exposed how fragile our entire operation really is." But the real tipping point, the moment that defined her legacy, came not on television, not on Twitter, but at an unexpected location. The Reagan Presidential Library. It was the 40th anniversary gala for the library, an event historically reserved for statesmen, dignitaries, and political figures with long legacies. This time, however, the keynote speaker wasn't a former president. It was Kayleigh McEnany. When she walked to the podium, dressed in a simple white gown, every guest rose to their feet. No teleprompter, no notes, just her voice and silence waiting to be filled. "When I walked into that CNN studio weeks ago, I didn't walk in looking for war, but war found me. And instead of running, I stayed because I believed something bigger was at stake. Truth." She paused. paused. You see, the truth doesn't shout, that IT doesn't threaten, that IT doesn't play politics. But when spoken clearly, it shatters illusions like a hammer through glass. Her words were like a baptism for the crowd. Old senators dabbed their eyes. Young campaign aides scribbled notes furiously. Reagan's own son stood in the back, nodding slowly. What we're living through, Kayleigh continued, isn't just a culture war, it's a clarity war. A war between those who want you to believe nothing is true, and those who dare to say, no, this is real, this happened, and we will not forget. Her speech went viral again. #Clarity War began trending worldwide. Even some legacy journalists admitted, this wasn't political anymore, that IT was spiritual. Sentinel's subscriber base doubled in the next 72 hours. YouTube's algorithm began recommending her videos to people who had never once watched political content. Reddit, TikTok, even niche forums lit up with clips, quotes, discussions. People began gathering in real life, coffee shops, churches, universities, holding clarity nights to discuss how they'd been misled and how they'd found the courage to think again. INDC political consultants whispered that Kayleigh might be untouchable now. She's built a platform no one can cancel. One strategist told The Hill. She doesn't need a network. She is the network. Ironically, CNN's final attempt at damage control sealed their fate. 2 months after the interview, they aired a Media Integrity Summit, an hour-long special hosted by Anderson Cooper, featuring intellectuals, professors, and legacy anchors trying to defend journalistic standards. Halfway through, a protester stormed the stage wearing a Sentinel t-shirt and shouted, "Tell the whole story. Kayleigh exposed you." The clip cut out, but the damage was done. That clip became a meme. One caption read, "Live look at CNN when truth shows up uninvited." By now, Kayleigh had done what few political figures, especially women, had ever accomplished. She'd transcended her party. She'd become a symbol. The symbol of poise under pressure, of eloquence and battled, of truth spoken with backbone and beauty, and perhaps most importantly, of what happens when a single voice refuses to ask for permission. And as she sat in her new Sentinel studio one quiet evening, the city lights blinking beneath her office window, she pulled out a notebook. On the first page, she wrote one line, "Never forget how much power one sentence can hold." And underneath it, in smaller print, "They gave me a microphone, I made it a mirror." And that's how Kayleigh McEnany changed modern media forever. Not by shouting over her enemies, but by standing in their silence and making the truth echo louder than all their lies.